Okay, we'll begin. Let's begin. Kia ora, everyone. Good evening, good morning, good day to wherever you might be zooming in from. My name's Catherine Murupainga Aiken, and I'd like to, as your host, welcome you to this third Pathway to Survival webinar, Te Tiriti-based Citizens Assemblies, Doing Democracy Better. But before we get underway, I'd like to kick things off in the usual manner with a karakia, just to set us off right. Ko te pu te more te weo te aka te rea. Ko te wao nui te kune te whe te kore te po. Ki ngā tangata Māori nā rangi raua ko papa. Ko tēnei te timatanga o te ao. Ko tēnei te timatanga o te ao. Tūturu whakamaua ki a tēnā, tēnā. Haumi e hui e tai e. Kia ora. He mihi poto tēnei ki te mana whenua o te motu whānui me ngā mate i arohe o te motu haere atura ki te kāinga tūturu o te tangata. So that's just to acknowledge the First Nations Māori peoples of Aotearoa, including recognition that Te Tiriti justice is necessary to realise climate and social justice. Also acknowledging those who may have passed away recently and wishing them a safe journey to the true resting place of the spirits. So before introducing our three lovely panelists, our manuhiri today, a few housekeeping matters. So to introduce our group Pathway to Survival, who's the hosting group for tonight's webinar. Our kaupapa is to mobilise conversations and coalitions for action that respond consciously and effectively to the environmental, climate, social, economic and other converging crises we now face. And we recognise that urgent radical transformation is needed to build resilience and ensure a future, ideally an equitable, dignified future for our families, our communities, environment and society. A future which resolves the festering injustices of ongoing wealth inequality and Aotearoa's colonial legacy. We'd like to invite at this time any members of our audience to visit our website. It will be in the events page which you registered on, and I am giving a hat tip to our back office superstars, our rock stars, to put maybe a link in the chat box too, so we'll have it there for your convenience. And this webinar is being recorded for later posting on our YouTube channel. And also, if you prefer to stay anonymous, that's all good. You just need to disable your video camera at your end. And you can also adjust your title and name if you wish. After our guest presentations finish around 8 o'clock, we're going to have a Q&A session. So as a build up to that, we would like to invite you to pop your questions in the chat box, and we have some lovely helpers who will be monitoring the chat box, and they'll be helping us later to identify questions which we can put to our panelists. So feel free to do that. So around 8:30, the formal part of our webinar will finish, and we'll stop the recording, and then we'll just, for any who want to hang around and have an informal conversation, it won't be recorded. We'll just be here and be available to around, I don't know, 9 PM maybe at the latest. So that's kind of the format for this evening. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panelists. Let's get into this. First up we have Te Ratana, and he's from Extinction Rebellion Whakatu, Nelson, and they're campaigning for a Te Tiriti-based People's Assembly for their local community, including sharing about civil disobedience, he'll be talking about, and also community engagement and other campaign tactics that they've been employing. And our second speakers will be Ashleigh Sagar, she's from Ngāti, and Kelly O'Neill, who's come from the People Speak campaign group. That's a grassroots group based in Te Upoko, Te Ika, or Wellington. And these two groups are working together to co-design a Te Tiriti-based deliberative democratic process in response to the climate crisis for Porirua, the city of Porirua there in Wellington. So let us begin with handing it over to you, Te Wehi. If it's okay, you've got like 15 minutes to just give us a presentation on your campaign and the kaupapa up there that you're working on. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Catherine. Tēnā koutou katoa. Just quickly, ko tuhi Ratana tōku ingoa, ko te aroa ngā rauru me ngā tirau kaua te iwi, no Rotorua ahau. So I was born and raised in Rotorua, and through life, found my way here in Whakatu. So yeah, here to speak about our kaupapa that we have going on down here in Whakatu, which is, like Catherine said, to have a Te Tiriti-based People's Assembly established in our local community as a binding decision-making process. So it sits alongside or whatever same powers that, let's say, local council might have. But before I get into it, I thought I might start by maybe grounding us in why we're here. I want to do it for myself, and I want to do it so I know, what we're getting into. So I thought the best way to do this was to talk to you about my biggest fear, and if we don't manage to stop what's coming in terms of climate collapse, social collapse, and in my way of thinking, inevitably extinction of life on this planet. And I think that's where we seem to be heading. So my biggest fear around the future is, sorry, a bit of context is I'm a dad. I've got 3 young boys. I'm a stay-at-home dad, so my main responsibility in life currently is to raise my kids, and that's the one thing I want to be doing more than anything else. So my biggest fear in the future is having to watch them suffer and not be able to do anything about it. And I believe that's a real possibility when we look at it from the lens of climate collapse, because ultimately the underpinning thing of that will be mass suffering and death. And that is something I wouldn't wish upon my worst enemy, for them to witness that with their kids, and that's something I do not want to go through. So that's my main driver and why it is I do what I do. And he's hoping we can avoid that from happening. So yeah, a bit about me. I'm a staunch member of Extinction Rebellion Aotearoa, Extinction Rebellion Whakatu. I've been active in this group since 2019. Prior to that, I had no experience in activism. I had no real knowledge of climate change. I spent time in Tāmaki Makaurau as a early young adult, where I met my partner, and then from there we went into dairy farming, and we dairy farmed for about 5 years. Within that space, we had our first child. So and then moved around the country. From there, moved back into the city. Once we did have a bit of an awakening to the destructiveness of that industry, and couldn't justify being part of it. So we moved into the city, got a job in the trades, and years gone by, probably 3 years. And the story goes, I was sitting there at work, listening to the radio, and on the radio came over the news from London that a group called Extinction Rebellion had blocked the streets of London for 12 days. And there was a small snippet but it stuck with me, and I got home and I jumped on YouTube and had a look. And then a month later, I was sitting on the railway tracks in Ōtautahi, Christchurch, blocking a coal train from getting to Littleton. So I would say I was radicalised pretty quickly, but I'm happy that happened. So yeah, and then from there, I've done lots of different things. I think I've been arrested probably 7 or 8 times since then. Super glued my hands to the steps of Parliament for 23 hours, and multiple different things. But it came to a point for us, for myself, for other activists that I was part of in our local group, to really look at how effective we were being, or whether or not what we were doing was working. So, you know, this idea of what we were doing was locking ourselves on the things, gluing ourselves to things, stopping business as usual by stopping fertilizers from getting into fertilizer plants, all these kind of things that felt like what had to be done. But given the fact that we were all doing this off the bones of our own asses, so to speak, you know, we aren't paid, we're none of these things. It was how effective are we being, and is this how we're going to get the change we need to see? So through the process of reflection, it became obvious pretty quickly that there are so many things we could be fighting to try and avoid the thing we want to avoid, being climate collapse and ecological collapse. There's so many things across the board, whether it be animal agriculture or transport, or I don't need to list them all because we all know them if we're in this call. But the thing that really stuck out for all of us was this idea that we have a governing body, governing process at every level that allows these things to happen. At the same time, talking about they are doing their role in protecting the people they serve. So from there, we said, you know, if we go back, if we step away from all the bad and all the negative, and we look back and say, where can we be most effective? For us, it was at that center point, at the decision-making process that allows all these bad things to happen. And so it was like, cool. So what do we do? And again, through my involvement with Extinction Rebellion, so Extinction Rebellion has 3 demands. And I would also like to acknowledge that Extinction Rebellion was formed in England. And it came to Aotearoa with a lot of colonial mindsets, a lot of colonial undercurrents that had to be strongly addressed for it to be effective or even tika here in Aotearoa. And there was a lot of work done, especially by people like Te Whakahaurua, or groups like Te Whakahaurua, and inside Extinction Rebellion itself, to actively address these things. So within that, those 3 demands, the first one was tell the truth, the second one was act now, and the third one was beyond politics. And beyond politics, they were calling for citizens' assemblies. And so this is where the idea for me and for our group came from. Now, citizens' assembly isn't tika here in this country, I believe. It doesn't, for the sense that, what is a citizen here in Aotearoa? Under Te Tiriti, what is a citizen here in Aotearoa? If Māori never ceded sovereignty, then who are we citizens to? So we had to relook at what we're calling this idea of citizens' assembly. So from there, and again, this is off the back of a lot of other people's work, especially those of like Te Reo Ngā Tāngata, who we'll hear from after me, around this idea of Te Tiriti-based people's assemblies. But anyway, so this is the what we came up with. Well, not what we came up. This is where we landed. This concept, this idea of a Te Tiriti-based citizens' assembly or people's assembly, based off the concept of a citizens' assembly that has been tried and practiced all over the world. And so this is what we're out there trying to achieve. I've gone off script a bit. So yeah, so as members of Extinction Rebellion, our I don't want to say purpose, but our theory of change is to disrupt business as usual. We have a core principle of non-violence, and this is through I don't know, not reflection, but this is through, you know, a century plus. We can date it back. I'll date it back to Parihaka, of effective non-violent civil resistance, of people standing up against an oppressive power. So if we start at Parihaka, then we can go to places like Gandhi and the women's suffrage movement and all these other things, civil rights movement. They were all embedded in non-violent civil disobedience in a form as a way of creating change. Now, I think that we've been lied to about how change is made. Definitely in my generation, maybe not so much my parents and grandparents, in the sense that all these things that are put in place to give us a voice to see decisions made that the right decisions are flawed in the sense of a submission or a petition and I don't know how many people here can tell me that they've seen effective mass change come from writing a submission, or even a lifetime of submissions, or a lifetime of petitions, and all these things. I personally think that has been put in place to placate. Because when we look back through history, the change that we've seen, the change that we remember, have always been from the acts of people standing up and fighting for it non-violently. So that's what we as Extinction Rebellion are grounded in. So for us here in XR Whakatu, we still hold strongly to these principles of change, or how change is made. But there's a balance, because I don't think that by doing that is actually going to achieve what we want to achieve in the sense of a Te Tiriti-based People's Assembly, because a Te Tiriti-based People's Assembly has to embody everybody, has to embody your community, and your community has to support it. And so the other side of the non-violent civil resistance is this idea of mass community engagement, or community engagement, maybe not mass. So the other thing that we've done is we've sat down and we've said, who in our community do we have to speak to about this idea and get on side, so that when we demand it, it's not just coming from us as radical. Now I say radical in a good sense. I think radical is a good thing, but in the sense of a radical group of people who are willing to be arrested for their cause. For us to achieve what we want, this has to come from a deep need of our community, acknowledging the state that we're in, while also acknowledging the systems that we have in place are not fit to handle what we are facing. And it sounds cool. It sounds like, oh yeah, cool, yeah. But in reality, it's really hard to do, because people are disenfranchised, because people are stuck in a system that is so hard to change, because the people who are trying to change it are doing it in their spare time. But once we manage to, if we can manage to build the movement, or maybe not even the movement, build the concept from the ground up with everybody, then the ones that hold the power have to acknowledge that they have to acknowledge it. That's what I believe. I truly believe that. So what we did was we sat down and we said, who deserves, or who has respect in our community that we need to engage in. So we made a list, we made a list. And then we said, And so then that's where it is. So now we make the effort of reaching out to these groups and having the conversation. Because the biggest part of this is having that conversation. Because it is, to an extent, a new idea, even though it's not new. But once we can have these conversations with people and people start to understand the process, then we can create the need for it. So there's, alongside the civil resistance and the agitating and being loud and proud, there's this also other aspect of engaging and creating long-lasting, deep relationships with people who can amplify the message in their own way. And that's where we're at the moment. So, because I am doing this out of my own head, I didn't. Anyway, yeah, that's where we're at the moment. We're engaging with our community, but we're also taking action on the streets, and we're trying to build this awareness of the idea, and we're trying to get people to think outside the box, because there's still so many people who think the key is to influence politicians to make the right decision. For us, we're saying, no, we have to look at the system and we have to change that system. Because that system, no matter who sits in that seat, will still not give us the solutions that we need. That's what we believe. Looking forward and talking about, sorry, I'll just go back a second. That's where we are. We haven't completed our goal. Our goal is to have one established. We're also not the ones who are establishing it. We are the ones demanding it. For us, it's not our job to create the assembly. We are not experts in that. There are many people who are. We are the people who will go on the street, yell through a megaphone, put ourselves in the back of police cars, and fight for the cause. That's our role, and we're happy with that. We can accept that. So moving forward, in terms of, I think I just wanted to leave with one last thought, and that was, we talk about societal collapse as a thing that's going to happen, and I really want to look at this idea of why it's going to happen. And I think a big part of it is that when it does, when things start to fall apart, and this is what we've been told over and over again by experts, that it's going to happen if we don't address it. But if we don't address it and it starts to happen, the processes we have in place will not be able to handle the issues that they have to deal with when that happens. So the assembly, and I haven't talked much about it because I want to leave it for Kelly and Ash to talk more about it in depth, because they can and I can't. But in terms of the visioning, if that does happen and we have the status quo still in place, then we are doomed. But if we can put a process in place like this that deepens democracy in our communities now, we are so much more better prepared as a community for when the worst does happen. And that to me is a huge part of this. That's the resilience part. That's the getting ready for what's coming. Yeah, I'll leave it there. I apologise for being a bit all over the place, but thank you for listening.
That was great, Tauiwi. I agree with you about the urgency of the situation. You talk about it like, this collapse, and it is a collapse that is predicted, but also we're seeing collapses already happening around the world. Just because it's not here in Aotearoa necessarily in our face right now, we've all heard of places around the world where the climate is just doing very anomalous things, the droughts, the floods, and of course with that you have the social collapse side of things, where populations under pressure behave very differently. And I think people understand what I mean by that. When there's a stress on the population, You might have food or water insecurity, whatever, housing security, and yeah, things do fall apart and unravel very quickly. So I share your fear. I've got one son, and many of us do have families that we love and care about. So thanks for reinforcing that. And I would even go further too about the government. They don't just allow stuff to happen, they enable the bads to happen, you know. So we're going to next let Kelly and Ashleigh take the floor, and they might drill down into how citizens' assemblies actually operate. So you'll be wondering maybe, oh, it's kind of an abstract idea. We'll hear from Kelly and Ashleigh about, you know, what is a citizens' assembly? What kind of plugs does a assembly actually fix? Because to where he was talking about how the current system is not fit for purpose. It's spectacularly failing to protect and do its duty to serve the population, making good governance decisions. And so this is partly what the Citizens Assembly is about. So Kelly and Ash, I'm happy to hand to you and give you the floor. Thank you very much.
Kia ora koutou. Thank you very much for having us. Yeah, just very quickly, ko Kelly, tōku ingoa, I tipu ake au ki Otepoti, e noho ana a hau ki Pōneke. I grew up in Dunedin. My name's Kelly. I've been living in Wellington for the last 15 years. Yeah, and super happy to be joining Ash and all of you on this kaupapa tonight. So I'll just let Ash introduce herself too.
Kia ora koutou, ko Ashleigh Sagar tōku ingoa. I'm from Ngāti, as they said. I work for the Runanga in our Treaty and Strategic Relationship team, and my main mahi is climate change and environmental sustainability. You will hear my 2-year-old coughing on the side of me. She may cry, and I will mute myself if she does that, because that's not nice for anyone's ears to hear. But yeah, like obviously I'm a mother of 3, so I really feel what Tauiwi was saying. It is something that you do worry about, and so that's what drives me in my mahi also. Yeah, so it's a big rohe that we work with. I am a team of 1 for the climate change space. It is growing as people start to realise it's a thing, and that it requires more resource. So, but we'll talk about that more later. Back to you, Kelly.
Kia ora, sweet, thank you. So we have a slideshow that we're going to share, and I just want to apologise in advance if this kōrero is a bit Kelly heavy, because Ash wasn't sure if she was going to make it, so I sort of came up with a backup plan, and hopefully we can just smash. So just interrupt me whenever I'm talking too much, Ash, and keen to hear whatever you've got to share. So okay, so I'll share the screen with us all. That one there, that one here. Cool, we can see the screen now. So yeah, so I'm with Te Reo Ngā Tāngata, the people speak. I forgot to say that before. And with Ngāti Toa Rangatira, the people speak, we're collaborating to develop deliberative democratic processes in response to climate change for Porirua, for the people of Porirua. And this is in order to influence realistic solutions on climate and policy and on other really important issues as well. It doesn't stop there, because as we know, climate is an interconnected issue that's rooted in a whole lot of different things. So, and the other thing that assemblies do is, of course, make a lot of information publicly available, so it gives the wider public a lot of chance to participate as well. It's about doing democracy better, and we also are seeing this as an important mechanism and strategy towards constitutional transformation, which we'll also talk about a little bit as well. So this is about our Te Tiriti-based futures kaupapa. So yeah, then we've heard a little bit from Ash, who's going to sort of say about the Te Runanga and Ngāti Toa a little bit. Do you want to talk any more about Ngāti Toa? I don't know if people know like how big the
Yeah, sure, I can.
Or what you're up to in some of your mahi, yeah.
So I don't know what you guys know, but obviously we are it says there word, well no, it doesn't say there. Interesting. We've got to say we are a tainui waka. It's not even on there. It's Katie Pai. But so we're originally, when I say originally, I mean many years ago, originally from Kawhia, and then we came down with one of our chiefs who I'm sure many people know about, Te Paraha, and we moved down here. And we could go into we'll just skip over some of those other things. Fast forward 200 years, here we are. Our Runanga is the voice of our iwi, I guess, and our rohe stretches from the bottom of the south and the top of the south, bottom of the north. Jeez, I was just not hearing that. I don't know what anyways. So it's a pretty big area, and I mean our team alone, we're kind of in charge of working with all the city councils, and so that's I think 9 city councils we interact with across various different parts of those area that rohe, and that's just our team. We have a property team, we have an education team, and it just continues to grow. We have a new CEO, and he's been with us for 2 years actually. My daughter's my maka, and since he's been here, we've grown from it's not even 200% or something. We went from 150 to now I think just under 500 staff members. So it's hopeful, as we keep finding holes that our people have, we fill them. We make new things that serve our people. So that's kind of the nature of the game, right? Mambly now, Kelly, you cut in.
No, awesome. Kia ora. Yeah, and just some incredible things for a relatively small iwi. Like one of the projects that is amazing that people might or might not have heard about is a Ngāti Toa-led 900 home affordable housing development that's going on. And there's recently in the news I saw that the Runanga has bought 40 schools off of the Ministry of Education and is negotiating another 40 or something, just keeping on doing this massive and really amazing mahi. And
lots
on
of
climate,
clever people who find little loopholes within your claim, so it enables you to purchase the land that the schools sit on. So yeah, that was quite a if they knew that we could do that, that wouldn't have been in there.
Doing some super smart stuff, including in the climate area as well. So yeah, is my thing still going? Oh yep, okay, cool. So I'll move on to Te Reo Ngā Tāngata, the people speak. This is a little image of a couple of workshops that we've held over the years. So I'm a founding member of the People Speak. Before that, I was trained through apprenticeship in architecture and specialised in participatory design of community spaces, which is the transferable skill that I'm bringing now to participatory design of the future politics, hopefully. And yeah, so we came out of an assembly called, a conference called the Conference on Climate. A group of volunteers wanted to continue working on the idea of Te Tiriti-based Citizens Assemblies. Over the first year, we did a whole lot of presentations to councils and groups and regional groups and national groups, including the Climate Change Commission, and everybody that we spoke to and spoke with loved the idea and super positive. No politicians picked up the mantle, but the Climate Change Commission did offer their scientists and expertise to an assembly if we managed to get one going, so we are planning to hold them to account on that. In 2020 we held a big public workshop. Some of the photos you can see are from that workshop, and then at the end of 2020 we had the great fortune of having a kōrero with Ngāti Toa, Helmut Modlik, the CEO, and Naomi Solomon, the 2IC, And we decided over Kai and Kōrero that we should focus a project on Porirua specifically, and we've been working on that together ever since. So last year we held a thought leaders hui with community leaders in Porirua and came up with the idea of a two-tiered deliberative system, which we have been calling a talanoa and a wānanga. So that's an assembly of community leaders and an assembly that is sort of based on a citizens assembly. And yeah, so we'll talk more about that soon. So firstly, we're going to sort of start on like what's wrong with voting. Why are we not voting? And this is from Porirua group Facebook page. So in Porirua, well, first of all, New Zealand Parliament has always failed and is still not honouring our founding agreement of Te Tiriti of Waitangi. So it's completely understandable that trust is low, which equals voting is low, particularly among some communities. And then, yeah, so 60% of eligible voters in Porirua don't vote. For Māori and Rangatahi, we know that that's another 10% higher than that. On a national level, there are almost 1 million people enrolled voters or eligible to enroll voters who are not voting. That's 905,000 people, which combined is the size of Wellington, Hamilton, Tauranga, Dunedin, Rotorua, New Plymouth, Invercargill, Whanganui and Gisborne. That's how many people don't vote, is all of that. So imagine what our system might look like, our representative democracy could look like if those people were voting. However, as we've been talking about, actually people not voting makes a negative feedback loop of less and less representation, but our system is not designed to be dealing with these problems. In fact, it is enabling these problems. So we can't just try to increase voter turnout. We have to actually change how many people are involved in the conversation and enable deliberation at a far broader and ongoing level. And then Ash, we were talking about some of the issues around that Māori have in regards to difficulties of voting as well, like getting people. Do you want to add anything there?
Oh, it's an interesting thing because, you know, if you're on the Māori roll, you can't vote for your cousin who's running for the normal role. You can only vote for the people on the Māori seat. You know, it's a very interesting thing, you know, and I guess it would just be fine if you could just vote in all the spaces. But even then, I don't even know what that looks like. I don't know what the solution is. All I know is it's very strange and it feels like a really long-winded exercise and not necessarily what you think you'll vote, you know? Yeah.
And then the kind of quality of life, work life of Māori or marginalised other people getting into positions of power and the kind of shit that they have to deal with for lack of more polite language is enough to put anyone off. Yeah, so that's part of the problem. And then this is not even to, you know, mention the fact that this is all based on extractive capitalism and our government's hands are tied by a big industry who at this point seem hell-bent on driving us towards collapse. So what could it look like if we were doing citizen assemblies, if we're doing Te Tiriti-based deliberative democratic processes? And this picture is deliberately very vague because it's not up to me to design what that would look like, and I don't think any picture will do it justice, but in a nutshell, I think that what citizens assemblies can do for us, and I just want to acknowledge Wehi's comment about the term citizens, and we've had that problem too, but I guess we're just going to use the term citizen to mean the place where you identify your identity rather than as a voter specifically. I digress. So what could it look like? We could have Te Tiriti justice. We could have a place where we're able to talk about and deliberate on and come to difficult compromises, weigh up trade-offs that we need to do to decarbonise our society and to stabilise and rewild te taiao and the environment, and to adapt our most difficult industries like agriculture and transport to adapt our relationship with the environment and with waste, and to be able to say categorically to leaders what we want to do. So this is what assemblies can do for us, as well as increase our connections with international communities, which is important and a dialogue that needs to happen in order to address these global issues. And so why is government not going to save us? Well, the climate crisis, and I'm sure that we are preaching to the choir here a little bit, so we'll sort of go through quite a lot quite quickly, and really keen to hear your thoughts and have a conversation or some Q&A at the end. The climate crisis is rooted in colonialism, which put simply is the idea that some people are worth more than others and have the right to steal other people's land and resources. And the New Zealand government is a colonial government. So we have to address that, and it has extracted far more than its fair share, both here and internationally. Ngā Ture Pākehā, or Crown Law, is a system of setting minimum standards. So for example, we're allowed to pollute a river up to this amount, and if it becomes this polluted, then we'll reduce the amount of poison we're putting into it. But of course, that's only if someone finds out how polluted the river is becoming. Whereas the first laws of Aotearoa Tikanga Māori is about maximising the ability for systems to flourish. It's about aspirational regulations that are based on values and principles like manaakitanga, kaitiakitanga, ahika, and an ability to maintain well-being or balance. I don't know if you want to talk to any of that, Ash. This was me putting together, like I'm talking.
Right, no, that's great.
All right, I'll keep going. So at the moment, our planet is out of balance, as we all obviously know, and we have a very short time before this 4 billion a year window is going to close on us. In 2022, we've used practically all of our emissions, basically more than the emissions that we can safely use. And at the moment, our government is still promoting this idea that we could live in a 2-degree warmer world and maintain the systems civilization as we know it today. And that is, the science tells us that is completely impossible, and Indigenous people have been telling us that since the very beginning of when colonials were invading. So with citizens assemblies, this is about giving people the opportunity, because when people become fully aware of this situation, that's when we'll start seeing the social tipping points, including the license to do things differently politically, happen. So assemblies are a mechanism to transfer this information, and as has been talked about by Wehi and Catherine, during times of climate disruption, that is impossible, and that's being experienced by millions of people right now, predominantly in the global south and in low socioeconomic communities, and we have a responsibility to be mindful and to take that into consideration when we're addressing this as well. So we tend to, we sort of look like democracy is not bound by any one definition. It is not a static thing. It's by definition malleable by the population, but we have to make it super clear what we want, and standing with a sign is important, but it only gets you so far. So citizens assemblies is a tool to do that. And we have to get away from this idea that leadership is going to come up with ideas, because we will wait forever for them. They are reliant on us to come up with the ideas and then feed those ideas into the system, and eventually that brings about change, and it's very messy and slow and heavily reliant on protest and activism and charity work and all of these things which aren't appealing or valued by society in terms of financially, and aren't accessible to the majority of people either. It's a fundamentally broken system, and assemblies again address this and can significantly speed up the processes of bringing voice to power, which reduces the amount of resources that are required and has a positive feedback loop, because that then develops more trust when people can see improvements to difficult challenges. And the last thing on that is, I guess, that for the history of humanity, the way that we have dealt with difficult issues, come up with group decisions, created inventions, all these things, these phenomenal behaviors and characteristics that make us human, we've done that through conversations and storytelling. And right now, not enough people are involved in the conversation, and their stories aren't being heard. So what we are able to design for doesn't include their needs, and so we are dramatically limiting what we are able to achieve. This is a slide of logos of some assemblies that are happening around the world. This is just a very small group of them. Indigenous nations, you'll see in there, there's a bunch of Indigenous groups who are using the deliberative democratic model to and coming up with their own ways of doing that to present a strong and unified voice to colonial governments. And even in places like Australia, which I thought was possibly more racist than New Zealand, but they actually are doing this at a much greater level than we are as well. In Victoria, it's now compulsory for there to be deliberative democratic processes on all law changes. And there's also a First Peoples Assembly there, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So that quote at the bottom there is from an OECD report which analysed over 200 deliberative democratic processes happening around the world and found that they were enjoying remarkable successes. And they synthesised that successful representative deliberative processes are determined by 4 things. So those things are design integrity, and that means ensuring that the process is perceived as fair by the public. Sound deliberation, which means that the elements of the process, that's the elements of the process that can result in participants arriving at a collective decision. Influential recommendations, so some evidence that there is an impact from the assembly. And then impact on the wider public, which is about long-term effects and changes of public attitude and behaviour that happen because of the processes. So close to home here, if my slides are still going to work, close to home, on the one on the right, we'll start on the right. So this is a collaboration between Auckland University Centre for Informed Futures, Koitu, and Auckland Watercare, who have just finished an assembly that they're doing on the future of Auckland's water. So they held 6 workshops around with the wider community, and then had a group of 37 people who've done 4 weekends over September and have come up with the recommendation that the future of Auckland's water should be recycled water. And this is a real example of how the process of deliberation can allow ordinary people to come to a decision that involves really hard trade-offs and compromise. And they reached this conclusion saying that it was the most cost-effective option in relation to other options because it's the most environmentally friendly and assists with reducing wastewater, and it provides another source of water, but that it could only be implemented alongside a public education which would allow the wider public to understand where the recommendation was coming from. And then on the left, this is the First Peoples Assembly of Victoria. So they the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders in Victoria started a process where they designed their own assembly and worked out how to democratically elect people onto this assembly. The assembly met for a year and decided that they would pursue a treaty with the state of Victoria. And just last week, or a couple of weeks ago, the Victorian Parliament has now passed the first stage of this treaty legislation and are there making history at the moment. And so the Assembly is continuing to work on the mahi of defining what that treaty is going to be. And so I keep on going this way. It's backwards. We've already done these ones. Here we go. Okay, so yeah, we have a different situation here. We have Te Tiriti Waitangi, which sets us apart globally. And also have to acknowledge He Whakaputanga, which is the parent document of Te Tiriti, and that quote there, He Whakaputanga te tuakana, Te Tiriti te taina, that's from the Waitangi Tribunal claim on Te Tiriti and He Whakaputanga. So the Declaration of Independence determines the tino Rangatira, the paramount authority of tangata whenua in Aotearoa. And then Te Tiriti o Waitangi adds in kawanatanga, which allows British and other Tauiwi foreigners to immigrate, subject to the British Crown ensuring that those people aren't lawless, as was the case before Te Tiriti, and that they abide by the tikanga of tangata whenua, which is the paramount laws of Aotearoa. So obviously that agreement has become very out of balance, and tino rangatiratanga cannot be addressed within the kāwanatanga or crown system, because that's a contradiction in terms. So I'll just take this opportunity to introduce Mātiki Mai, which is a really important piece of work in this area, which is a Māori-led project looking at constitutional transformation and what needs to happen to bring our systems of governance back into balance for everyone. So they held hundreds of, and Catherine knows more about this as she was involved, but hundreds of hui, 252 to be specific. That's not including the rangatahi hui around the country, and eventually produced a report which synthesized a set of values and came up with 6 models, future of potential Te Tiriti governance, and 5 out of 6 of these models include a relational sphere between tino rangatiratanga and kāwanatanga. And so I am seeing this project as sitting within that relational sphere as determined by Mātiki Mai. And I would encourage people to look into more of that, because yeah, it is amazing, and it does set a really big groundwork for this work. Yeah, so we've already said that this can't be addressed by existing systems, but the climate also can't be addressed by the existing system. So what we find in this relational space is a real opportunity, where a site where we can have that deliberation and talk about the things that that aren't being addressed. So we're really lucky to have these parameters. Ash, stop me.
No, this is great. I'm loving it. I agree.
Okay, Ash agrees. Perfect. Okay, so so where are we up to now? This is where we are now up to. We briefly talked about before this kind of 2-tiered deliberative system, and we have been calling them talanoa and wānanga, but these are working titles, and we will be coming up with different names for these soon. Overview is the talanoa is an assembly of community leaders, and that means everybody from mana whenua, church leaders, sports clubs, the council, MPs who live in the area, business leaders, really the whole breadth, and that's where the power comes from, and it's the same with citizens assemblies. So we've held one talanoa, which we'll talk about in a minute, that had to be shifted online very suddenly, which was unfortunate. Well, I'm just seeing the time. Is it already that time? Okay, we need to rush through a little bit. And then the wānanga, which would be under the governance of the talanoa, and is more of a citizens assembly model. That is to say that there would be random representation that's carefully organised to make sure that everybody in Porirua is represented in some way at this wānanga, and that information can then be fed into the talanoa and used there, and yeah, that's basically where we're at.
Shall I add in there?
Please do.
So one really interesting thing about this whole process is that it's been a very fluid process, where it's been open to change, and it's been open to shifting to fit the audience or the people that we're trying to capture, really. And I just picked that up from what Te Wehi was saying, is that sometimes, because the words are just, they don't sit right when you citizens assembly, yeah, just the word assembly, I feel like someone at school. And so we had to really find new words, new kupu, to kind of take away, because already you don't want people to come on and then have their, the prickles, unsure, all of those, like, what is the space that I'm coming into? Is it a safe space? Because I'm really aware that we have us, Ngāti toa mana whenua, but we've also got a really large Polynesian population within Porirua. And then we've also got a large, you know, what are they? What's their name? I forget their name. You know, there's lots of minority groups within Porirua, and so you have to be able to include them and bring them along on the process, which is where Talanoa came from. And you know, at first that was gifted to us by a certain group, and then when the wider community got wind that that's what it was called, they weren't sure if that's what it should be called. So we wānanga'd with them and what that meant, and you know, and every time we've kind of come up against something, we've been open to change and having those conversations. And I think that's kind of an essence of what a Tiriti-based model is. It's figuring things out together so that we're all happy, and that we all feel comfortable, and that we all feel like we've contributed to the space in a really meaningful way, you know. And I think that's what's been really awesome about this process, is that at any time, because it's not been easy, Kelly, it's been it's been hard, but it's the kaupapa is worth it. And at first we didn't really think we were going to have the Talanoa space, this community leadership space, but that came out of it, and it's actually been really it's been kind of really cool having that space. We've even been able to help to mobilize the Pacific to make their own leadership space, which has been really awesome. So it's getting people talking, it's getting people keen on being able to make decisions and choices for as a community. So I think it's been a really awesome so far. Back to you.
Kia ora. Yeah, that's awesome. Totally. And that's been really beautiful for me, is having this slow understanding built up, and having it sort of rooted in the values of the Pacific, of you know, Talanoa, as I've been learning a lot, and you know, Talanoa is about free and frank discussion with an underlying requirement of respect, you know. So all of these ways of building consensus that have, you know, been really amazing to learn about. This is just this is a work in progress, a map of the community leadership at the moment, and where they're sort of based in Porirua. And when we started doing this, and it's not a fully complete map, but it became immediately obvious to us where we were missing and where we need to continue our explorations to make sure that everybody's sort of represented there. So just moving on. This is
add something to that bit, Kelly?
Yeah, please do.
Just something really interesting that me and Kelly found as we're back to your map.
Yeah.
Something we found, because it's about constituency, right? Like, that's why you're there, and that word doesn't really mean much or it means something, but it wasn't getting across kind of what and why you should be in the hui, or why you should be in attendance in that space. And what it came down to was like mana, like who, and that kind of felt better as a way of you know what. And I say that in a way like, you know, when someone has mana, you listen to them, you go to them, like you're happy to hear what they have to say. And so we wanted those sorts of people within their communities who may not be the supposed leader, but they are the person who sort of has the last say. And that's how I kind of that's how I kind of quantify a bit of mana, is like usually the one with the most, he or she has the last say. And so as much as it's not to say that we're not going to put people with their constituent, you know, their followers or their following. If you have one, cool, be there. But it just was another lens that we hadn't put onto that space, which was really important, and which I thought I needed to mention.
Cool. Yeah, and by that measure, which is different to any other deliberation process we've been able to identify around the world, there's actually 2 opportunities for everybody to be represented by the community leaders who you know, who have your interests in mind, and then by the wider assembly itself. So this is hopefully a bit self-explanatory because I'm not going to talk about everything. This is basically how we've simplified the components of an assembly. This is the wider assembly, not the Talanoa, but the population-wide version. So the three really key things are who's going to honour the outcomes, and in this case it will be going back to the community leaders, and also we want some commitment from council as well. Expertise of facilitation is really, really important. So helping people to listen deeply to each other, to be able to express themselves, to learn the information, and for that information to be the best information we can possibly find. And also make that information available to the wider population as well, so that they so that the education of everybody as a whole kind of shifts along as the assembly process happens. And then the third thing, which is essential, is the trust of the processes. I think we mentioned before, and that's determined basically by the first two things. And there are other ways for the public to be involved. The assembly can you know, visit particular groups, invite surveys or submissions, and I don't want to use the word submission because it's terrible, but you know, the media has a role to play as well, and again the media needs some accountability. But yeah, so we'll just flick past that one and hopefully have some time for questions. Yeah, we are almost there. So people in general, the responses from people who have been involved in deliberative processes are overwhelmingly positive. People feel that they have been supported to understand complex issues and that their opinions are valued. They feel valued for being trusted to make decisions on behalf of their communities. People feel ownership and pride over the outcomes from assemblies because of the involvement, and that's within, you know, within participants and also within wider populations. Participants have said that they learn new skills that are useful in their everyday life, and that the experience generally is a positive one for them in a more holistic way. And the other big comment that comes out is that this is not adversarial. You know, we have the politics at the moment. They fight worse than children. You wouldn't let your kids talk to each other the way that the politicians talk to each other in the House of Parliament. I cannot stand it. Whereas assemblies is about respectful dialogue, free and frank discussion with that underlying respect. Similarly, legislators love these processes. It takes a lot of pressure off of them. Things can happen a lot faster, a lot cheaper, which gives them, you know, better public, people like them more when stuff happens more easily. There's better chance of re-election. They don't have to be the face of really difficult issues, which can brand people for life or ruin their careers. And yeah, we've got some links that we can share where there's videos of decision makers and participants talking about their experience of the process. So then the thing that we're here to address, I suppose, is how do we make this happen? And if that's your style, you know, you can barricade your council into their buildings until they agree to a citizens assembly. Or as the people speak to their o ngā tangata, you know, we formed a group to try and push this kaupapa. So it's not easy. Talking about it is essential. That's what we're doing here. So talk about it with anyone you can. Definitely talk about it with mana whenua, local representatives, your family, your colleagues. Advocate for deliberation in every, you know, in places where you have a stake. So in your workplaces, in your chess club, whatever it is. We're going to make available as much information from our project as we can. We hope to open source it and create a kind of toolkit, and we welcome anyone to come and talk to us about it. And yeah, I guess just a couple of last things, like when talking to people, we'll try to remember that we don't have time to design a perfect society. None of these projects are going to be perfect the first time. Like Ash said, it's about learning and increasing the amount of participation in order to do it in a way that is going to benefit the most people possible. The bolt-ons to business as usual at the moment is basically why we are failing so dramatically to do something. So we have to do things fundamentally differently. And that, again, just to go back to Mātiki Mai, that's again where we can find leadership in that area. Remember that we're not short of resources at all. What we have is a distribution problem. Money is about labour and materials, and we have plenty of those. And COVID has shown us that we can change our behaviour and what is acceptable on a societal level very quickly if the right elements are in place. And it's also really important that we don't polarize this issue of deliberative democracy or assemblies or climate change into any kind of political left or right, because that's what the politicians have been doing. They're happy for it to go to the left, and it's just not, we need to respond to this as a whole, and then we can deliberate, ideally argue if we have to, about our political differences within that remit once we've accepted that that is the problem that we are working on. And I guess lastly, on the how do we get there, if you've got any ideas, we'd love to hear them. Ash, do you want to have you got any last thoughts? That's me basically now. Ash, do you want to add any last things there? Oh, sorry, I can't see if you're talking or not. No, she might be dealing with a child. Cool, so thank you for listening to us, everybody. I will stop sharing my screen, and that's our little slideshow.
Kia ora, thank you, Kelly and Ashleigh. That was very informative, and I was thinking to myself, you know, because the conventional government system is failing so miserably, and you talked about we don't have a problem with resourcing. It's about the allocation, the distribution of resources. That's really the issue. I agree with you there. It made me think about possibly a good topic for a citizens assembly some point in the near future might be a people's budget. What would a people's budget actually look like? And then you're really talking, because the resources are going to the right places, not to energize or subsidize things that are bad for society. I've always thought about, you know, I love the idea of paying my taxes. If I was happy where my taxes were going to, I would look forward to the next day every year, but I don't, because I don't like where my taxes are going to, and I do not agree necessarily with where my taxes go to. So yeah, great. Thank you for that presentation, and I think we might just jump straight into now the Q&A, and I will be calling on my good colleagues out there in internet land on the Zoom to help pull out some of the questions from the chat. Can
I just say quickly that a couple of, there's some colleagues from Te Reo Ngā Tāngata online too, who are welcome to answer questions too if they can. And Sharon has just mentioned, which I was going to say, Catherine, that Brazil, specifically Belize and São Paulo, has some incredible examples of participatory budgeting, which have transformed some areas of their town. And yeah, I'd encourage everyone to look into that. It's amazing.
Nice, kia ora. Carrie, may I hand over to you to guide us through navigate through some of the questions that may have come up in the chat, and we'll invite our panelists to have a go at answering them.
Yeah, that was great. You packed lots of information in there. Thank you very much. I pull out some of the questions that people have put in the chat, and I've got my own questions too, so they're on it. You may have covered part of this, but I think you might find you've got more to say on these questions. So the first one I'll ask is, has there been, this is from Olivia, has there been a citizens assembly that has incorporated marae forms of governance? Can you say anything about whether you know whether anything like that has happened anywhere?
I'll talk to that first. I'm not sure, Ash might have a different answer being more based on the marae, but my short answer would be no. The only sort of thing that I think can officially be sort of called a citizens assembly that's happened in Aotearoa to date has been this very recent one with water care, and they were careful to involve as much mana whenua and to honour Te Tiriti as much as they could, but it was very much based from a kawanatanga space.
Sorry.
That's okay. Did you hear that question?
I did, and I mean, I've grown up on the marae. I'm not sure what marae based, what that is. Could you elaborate if whoever asked it, and then maybe I could answer it?
The question came from Olivia, so if Olivia wants to stick some more into the chat, we could
Ask it again,
pass that on
sorry.
to. I wonder. I think maybe that's. We'll see if more comes out as a question on that. But I'll move on to another question and come back to it if there's more there. Can you?
I just say that is what we are trying to do. That's what we're hoping to do.
Yeah, what was the actual question, Kelly? Sorry.
It was about building marae processes into citizens assemblies, but I would say that we're doing that very carefully because we don't want to like steal tikanga. So yeah.
I mean, we're doing that I think we're doing that. That's what I'm certainly doing. Because if I'm gonna try and coerce our people to come and show up these spaces there, we have to make it safe and something that is familiar and that they understand. I'm not trying to colonise them into a process. You know, it's their process and it's what they want. So that's the answer.
Can I have Piggy Book?
So there's a question here from Kiwi Fruity, whoever that is. How do we make the decisions binding? The working group on welfare reform and child poverty had a list of excellent actions which were roundly ignored by politicians. And I think I had a kind of question in my mind as well that sort of related to that about was there, for the process that you have been using, was there any commitment ahead of time to honour decisions that came out of these processes that you've set up? Or that you are building, or you know that you
I can start. Yeah, so I think that this is really one of the things that excites me a lot about our project is that we're not waiting for permission from anyone. You know, it's not necessarily reliant on the council saying that they will do X, Y, and Z. And we have seen around the world that has been the failing of a lot of places, you know, like these assemblies that came out of the kind of Extinction Rebellion movement, like in the UK and in France and places like that. They had great success in the assembly. And then when it came to actual implementation, there was like 3% of the recommendations from the French Citizens Assembly have been addressed, and a further 10% was all that was actually accepted by the government. So it's a really, really big issue. And what we have with the Talanoa is actually a place for those recommendations to land, which is formed of the people in the community who are the movers and shakers. So they can take that information immediately and apply it to the areas of their work. And then what you have is these two grassroots groups, these large platforms, which can then add pressure to the council if the council haven't already agreed that they will do what the assemblies want. So I think that that's a real point of difference to us, is we're actually creating the power within the community itself at the same time as we're building these deliberative models. So the council is going to have a really hard time not listening to it. And eventually we'll have eventually they'll have to agree to be bound to what the recommendations are.
Yeah, I also think it's quite smart how you guys approached iwi, because we already have these partnerships, or we meant to have these partnerships with all these people, like decision makers, i.e. city councillors and all the people in the area, you know, people are coming to iwi as opposed, we don't necessarily always have to go to other people, people come to us. And so I think it was really smart to actually, and if you're moving forward other people, I would attach yourself to an iwi and then go from there, because the reach and the community that is surrounded it, and that's just not just our own community, but it's other communities, it helps. And then when as far as implementation, you know, we will implement it throughout our whole situation, and then it will filter into everything else that we do and with everyone else. But sorry, Catherine, I see your hands up.
Go, Catherine.
But I just wanted to add that, of course, many councils, they use this, well, it's a justification sometimes, but sometimes it's just an excuse, that central government policy binds them and they're pegged in. So there are things at the community level that, say, for example, a People's Assembly might decide, really the decision has to go up the food chain. So I guess my question is, at some point we'll hit that ceiling, we'll hit that limit, and we will have to escalate this model for a central government People's Assembly model. Do you guys have any thoughts about that at all? Kia ora.
Sounds like a lot of work. But obviously, that's you, Kelly. I'll be stuck in my role here, fighting my good fight here.
Yeah, Tika. Yeah, I think definitely, like, it's gonna, I agree with you, Catherine. I am really interested in the kind of work around constitutional transformation alongside this work that we're doing on Te Tiriti-based assemblies. So I'm not sure whether we, you know, which one to kind of push first, because perhaps we can address them both at the same time. But I think the really big question, rather than giving you an answer, is more about how do we work in a Te Tiriti framework in this relational space. One of the benefits of our project is that the mana whenua in Porirua is Ngāti toa. So we've got one iwi, and therefore a Te Tiriti relationship is quite straightforward. So when that scales up to a region like in Whakatu, for example, where I think it's 11 iwi that you are talking with Tauiwi, is that right? And you know, so that's going to involve a whole lot more exploration and work there. And once we start getting these sort of things established around the country, then I imagine we'll begin answering some of those questions about how do we take it up another level. But hopefully we'll have constitutional transformation by then, so the whole thing will look different. 8 iwi in Whakatu.
Thank you. Can you say, there's a question here from Sharon, can you say anything more about how the decision is made about who's in the community leaders part of that, the talanoa, and who is part of the Wānanga wider citizens group? Slight paraphrase of a question from Sharon here.
I mean, it's not that we know who's in either space. We have an idea. We've been consulting with lots of different people within the communities, and then even those within each small little, they themselves will pick and choose who they think should come. And so, short answer, no. Long answer, it's an evolving space, and that's why me and Kelly went to the map, you know, so you can visually see and make sure that you're hitting all your regions within Porirua, because you don't want to just have it real heavy, you know, with one side and then you're missing a whole other side, you know, because there's so much variety in Porirua. You know, you've got the rich of the rich and you've got the poor of the poor side by side. You've got probably every culture you can think of and then some. And so trying to get them all has been an interesting dance, Kelly? And we may not get it right, and that's okay, because we're not coming out there saying we're going to get it perfect, but we're open to it because it's a long process. This isn't a short process. We're not just going to do it once. We can see both of these bodies being a thing that's just going to be normalised and part of Porirua decision making going forward. And we've had quite positive feedback from council on this whole process, because it helps with all of their processes too. You know, they don't get a lot of feedback a lot of the time, and they're always looking and clutching at straws and trying to figure out how to get better engagement. And you know, so because you want to capture everybody, not just those who are the loudest and who constantly have, you know, they got the hotline to make their complaint, and so you want to get the ones who say nothing as well. Yeah, so no real answer there, sorry. But it's an organic space, and we expect that we won't get it right, and then we might crack it, and we're happy with that, you know. And it's just moving forward as best we can, really.
Can I, is beyond the idea of trying to get people from different areas so that it was more balanced, so that it wasn't all from one corner, were people self-selecting, and like, was it basically an open invitation and anyone could join, or did you pick people?
We picked people.
Or people chosen for the citizens assembly?
Yeah. I mean, between our leadership space, like, you know, I'm a lot lower down the chain. Up there, they already had a really good idea of leadership, other people within the Porirua Rohe. And so they all gave feedback, and then so each people that we've actually engaged with, they've given forward names. We've gone through, you know, we've sieved through a few, and then at the first one, it was kind of anyone and everyone, you know, and that was cool. It was like 94 people on this Zoom on a Saturday, you know, at like 3 days notice that it was going online. So grateful as that, I'm stoked with that response and with who showed up. But we think that, you know, you will either be a citizens assembly climate change one, or you want to be, and people kind of know where they want to go and what space they would rather be in. But I mean, at the same time, it's not a, you know, oh, you're too late, can't get in either of the groups. There's plenty of space. But yeah.
Yeah, and just to
your question at all.
Just to reiterate what Ash was saying before, apart from I just lost my chain of thought. I'll go back to another thought, which was that the kind of guiding principle that we had, that's what I was going to say, was that sort of like the ability, the mana, the ability for people to feel that they can tell a certain person, you know, the things that are important to them. Like if someone has mana in the community, that makes them a leader, kind of by that definition. And then the other definition that we were working with was if people have a constituency at all. And the work in the Talanoa or the community leaders group at the moment is to determine and to agree on what that group looks like and what the kind of membership and sort of terms of reference, if you will, are. And I've just had a look through the participants here, and just as an example, we have with us Amanda Dobson, who is part of our Talanoa group at the moment, and Amanda is the regional coordinator of the Enviro schools in Porirua. So that's sort of, you know, so there's all sorts of people involved, and really it was about an organic process of having people recommended, of people in leadership positions choosing people, of reaching out to all sorts of community organisations around Porirua who knew who the people were who were able to be representative of the wider population. So hopefully that answers that a bit.
think I should ask one more question and then let Catherine wind up, I think. So I've got one more question, which is a bit of a conglomeration, but can you say something about the particular issues that your assembly tackled and how people were informed so that people will had a good basis of information to make decisions on and to deliberate about, and then what kinds of proposals and outcomes came from that? Is that something you could say something about?
Yes, good point. This is actually something that I skipped over in the presentation that I did mean to touch on. So the things that we worked through were really the whether or not the group of leaders that we had pulled together agreed on the proposal to have a standing forum of community leaders and an assembly on climate, and there was a general agreement for that. On top of that, the discussion was a lot around a need for unity in Porirua. So wanting for there to be some mechanisms as a way to act in unison and to come together as a community. And there was also strong agreement and discussion on the fact that there is a real need for new mechanisms for well-being, for protecting the well-being of people in Porirua, and a real fear around the status quo and where we are headed. And then there was also permission for Ngāti Toa to continue this exploration into this project, and also to continue their leadership on this project, and an agreement to return to Hui in the future, which is our or to return to Hui in the near future, and we wanted it to be sooner, but it is scheduled for the 3rd of December. And were there any? So there haven't been any specific proposals or outcomes that have come from this yet. It's still in process. Am I understanding that right, or have there been some? So we are very much building this at the moment. We haven't finished building anything. So we are establishing the Talanoa, which is the governance assembly, and through establishing that, we will come up with the parameters for the Porirua wide assembly, which will involve the random sortition of ordinary people, so to speak, to use that kind of citizens assembly language.
Yeah, and I think the outcomes were actually separating the two. That was like a big outcome, was establishing this this leadership space, because we were only going in it doing the citizens assembly. And we've actually spent a lot more time establishing this leadership group, actually trying to get what Kelly was talking about, like this unity, and establishing what that looks like. And we've been through a lot of processes where we've tried to understand, like, genuinely what that looks like, not just for us, because, you know, we want our voice heard, but also for the Pacific. And when I was talking about before, it's like that's actually helped them to mobilise to create their own, leadership group aside from the leadership group that we've had. So I mean, it has helped to kind of, create all these little spots of unity, but also mobilising people to have a voice for their communities, because they, usually you just lump them in this one group, the Pacific. But they're actually like, I think 9 or 11 different islands. So they have all different, they're not the same, and you usually just lump them all in one space, just like you do with Māori. And it's really important that we've given them all space and allowed everyone to kind of be heard and make sure that it's an authentic process that everyone's happy with. So it's been a lot of work. It's not... And Kelly's been really patient, because sometimes I've had little tantrums, and she takes it on her chin, and we rejig it, because at the end of the day I'm going to get told off. So if you don't feel right with it, you've got to say something. And the whole process has been challenging, but also really, really beneficial, and learnt heaps. And I think it's the relationship that we're building is an actual real example of what Tiriti-based processes look like. You know, it's not perfect, but we're getting to where I think we want to get in the end. And it's developing as we go. Yeah.
Yeah. Shall I hand it back to you, Catherine?
Thank you. Thank you, Kerry, for helping us with that part of this evening's events, and for your responses as well. And I just wanted to, before we do wrap up, I just wanted to offer a quick fire round, including yourself, Tauiwi, because we haven't heard from you in that portion of the webinar, but if you have any final short remarks you'd like to make, and then we can close off this part. Just a reminder though for people, please stay on afterwards if you'd like to informally continue some discussion. We've got a bit of time allocated for that after we close. Kia ora. Tauiwi, I'll hand over to you first if you have any final remarks, and then come around to our other manuhiri as well.
Kia ora, Catherine. Yeah, I saw a question pop up in there talking about government, local and national involvement in creating these assemblies. And I think it's a good question, but I think there's two ways we can go about getting this done. I think there's an easy way and a hard way, or a short way and a long way, maybe, I don't know. But I think there is a place for those bodies to be, there's a place for them in the creation of these. But we have to be really aware of the fact that they have the potential to corrupt it as well. So for us here in Whakatu, we think a large part of their participation in creation of this is to fund it. And that's it, because as we see with Kelly and Ash, it's a huge task, absolutely massive. And I know Kelly does a lot of it off her own spare time. And what we're talking about is trying to better our communities and better our processes and how the decisions are made for everybody. So this is a good thing. So for us, a lot of our pressure that we'll be putting on council will be saying, we want your commitment, not only for the assembly to be binding, but for you to fund the creation of it. And that's it. We don't want you to be in there trying to create it. I think the creation has to be among iwi and community and outside sources, but council bodies and governing bodies have the funds, so that's where they should put it. So that might be my last little bit.
Sure, Wehi, kind of goes back to, like, you know, people's budget at local level as well. There's going to have to be a discussion around that. Kia ora, thank you. Kelly and Ash, any final remarks?
Kia ora. I think we may have just lost Ash, unfortunately, which is a bummer, because my final remark was basically going to be mihi to Ash, who has kind of had this big kaupapa dumped on top of, you know, what the runanga is already dealing with, which is massive. And yeah, her commitment has been really, really integral to where we've been able to take it so far. So yeah, I would definitely give my last remarks to that. And I guess just finally on your thing, Wehi, I completely agree. I think council should be funding this, but I'm like, at this stage, I'm really stoked that we are not focusing our time on having to campaign to council to fund this. We're just actually making it, creating it, which is far more exciting to me. But I think one of the real cool visions is that like the participatory budgeting thing, you know, at the end of the day, because we have council within the Talanoa group, the group of community leaders, they are essentially leaders of people's taxpayer money. So once the assemblies are fully kind of functioning, I can see a point where the assembly will just be telling council how to spend their money, basically how to spend people's money, with a lot more authority than what they're currently doing, or a lot more mandate than what they currently have. Yeah.
Kia Thanks, Kelly. That's awesome. Everyone, this is the end of our formal part of the webinar tonight. I'd just like to again thank our panelists, our manuhiri, Kelly, Ashleigh, Wehi, and also I just want to recognise and acknowledge all of our team in the back there or in the front, wherever, to make this webinar happen. It does take a bit of effort and coordinating, and we hope we're getting more streamlined at it, and we expect to also put together more webinars in the future, so please stay tuned, because there's a lot, as you know, to cover. And again, a reminder, we've got a website. Please check out Pathway to Survival's website if you want to learn more about what we're up to and where we're going. And thanks, to you, the audience, for even, because you could be anywhere doing anything and you chose to be here. And we're just really, really super grateful that you are here. We just wish to acknowledge you all for being here. So with that, I'll just do a closing karakia for us, and then for whoever's staying on, we'll be here for that informal discussion. Unuhia, unuhia, unuhia ki te uru tapu nui, kia wātea, kia māma, te ngākau, te tinana, te wairua, I te ara takata. Ko ia rā e rongo, whakarirea ake ki runga, kia tīna, haungie, huie, tai e. Tēnā koutou pōmarie, and we'll be here for those who wish to stay on.